This morning, we are looking at the ever-changing nature of time. And so this is a sermon where I've had piles of different songs stuck in my head this week, from Turn, Turn, Turn by the Byrds to Time Marches On by Tracy Lawrence, and I even had Metallica stuck in my head. Right, and For Whom the Bell Tolls, and even all the way to some David Allan Coe. Although that wasn't connected to the time, that was connected to something else, and I'll fill that in whenever we get there. This march of time, the ever changing nature of time, is something that is especially present this time of year. Winter, spring, summer. Those are seasons that largely stay the same from day to day. When you get up in the morning, so when you lay down at night and you get up the following morning, the flowers that were blooming yesterday are the same flowers that are blooming tomorrow, right? And things fairly largely stay together. But this time of the year, not so much, right? Like we have time change. This time of the year, and we really feel the crunch of time as the daylight gets really short. But even more than that, with what the wind does, trees that were green yesterday were brown today. Trees that had leaves yesterday are naked today. Right? And there's a very big difference each day compared to what we had the day before. And so, and then even as we get into the holidays, right, and we start to feel the crunch of time as we do Christmas shopping, especially as Thanksgiving is late this year. And so there's a compressed amount of time between Thanksgiving and Christmas to get everything done. And so this is a time of year that we really feel the pressing of time, or the marching of time, or just that ever-changing nature of time. The teacher, the author of Ecclesiastes, talks about the nature of time. And we're going to be looking at a poem that he wrote this morning. And there's some more to it that I'm not going to get into, but we're just going to focus on the poem this morning. So I want to invite you guys to open your Bibles, turn them on to Ecclesiastes chapter 3. The easiest way to get to Ecclesiastes, I think, is to find Psalms or Proverbs. And then Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes. And so it's a really tiny book, just 12 chapters after the book of Proverbs. So Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes. And Ecclesiastes 3 is a poem about time. And it's a poem that I've heard other pastors, other preachers take out of context. So we're going to keep it in its proper context this morning. And as we do this, this poem should sound incredibly familiar because the phrases of this poem make up the verses of Turn, Turn, Turn by the Byrds. And so everything that we read here, you should have heard in that song that was playing before I walked up here. Right? So it should sound familiar. So Ecclesiastes chapter 3, starting at verse 1. It says, "There is an occasion for everything, and a time for every activity under heaven, a time to give birth and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build. There's a time to weep and a time to laugh. There's a time to mourn and a time to dance. There's a time to throw stones and there's a time to gather stones. A time to embrace and a time to avoid embracing. A time to search and a time to count as lost. A time to keep and a time to throw away. There's a time to tear and a time to sow. A time to be silent and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. And a time for war and a time for peace." Now, I've heard preachers take this verse, take these verses to articulate it, especially the opening verses, that there's a time to give birth and a time to die, to really argue, right, when it's your time, it's your time. Right? When God calls your number up, it's your time to go. And so they use these verses to make the argument that God is in control and he has ordained a time for everything according to his good season and his good purpose. Right? And while those things may be true, and we can use other scriptures to make those points, that is not the point of these verses. Right? The point of these verses is that time is always changing. Right? We can make the point that God's in control. Various places that we want to go, some of my favorite verses are Genesis 50, verse 20. What you meant for evil, the Lord meant for good. Right? As Joseph talking to his brothers and they sold him into slavery. Well, because they sold him into slavery, he went to Egypt, wound up managing the economy all of Egypt and saved millions of lives in the Middle East because of his economic policies. Right? And he says to his brothers, what you used for evil, what you meant for evil, God used for good. A New Testament version of it, can't give you a chapter or a verse, but the Lord works all things for the good of those who love him. Right? It doesn't mean that God causes bad things to happen to us, but he will take the things that happens to us and he uses them to fulfill his good purpose. Right? And so we can find other scriptures, right, to make the point that God is in control. That's not the point of these verses. Right? And we can just work our way down through the verses and understand that. Right? I mean, on the surface, when we say there's a time to give birth and a time to die, like we can understand that God, has ordained that. There's a time to plant and a time to uproot. Sure, there's seasons. There's a season for planting and there's a season for harvest. There's a time to kill and a time to heal. You really mean to tell me that there's a time when I'm not supposed to heal? My child comes to me and they're bleeding and they ask for a Band-Aid, and so, nope, the Lord has ordained it. This is not the time to heal. Right? Or there's a time to tear down and a time to build. There's a time to weep and a time to laugh. We don't laugh at funerals. That's the time for weeping. We don't tell jokes at funerals. There's a time to mourn and a time to dance. There's a time to throw stones and a time to gather stones. Fascinates me that the Lord has ordained a time to throw stones. He has appointed a time for us to throw stones at each other. There's a time to embrace and a time to avoid embracing. Man, I would love that one. Somebody approaches me for a hug. Nope, the Lord has ordained it. It is not the time for embracing. Right? Like we work our way through these verses and we understand, right, that when we apply that point to the entirety of the context of the Scripture, we understand that that's not the point. Right? That the purpose of these Scriptures is that time change is always happening. Right? So that, right, if we're in a place right now just where like life is hard and it's hurting, it'll change. If you're in a place right now where like life is easy and you're in a season of plenty, that'll change. Curiously enough, I had somebody ask me what I was looking forward to in life right now 2 weeks ago. And I said, for the last 3 years, I've been trying to work our budget into a time of plenty. And so then Christina missed a bunch of work took unpaid leave for Theo, and so we had to financially adjust for that. And then there's Quinn going to daycare, and we misread the fine print on the financial assistance, and so I had to pay full tuition for all of that. And I said, I'm at the place now where I think November is the first month where I'm going to finally experience that season of plenty. And my wife almost burnt muffins yesterday because we recognized that the top element on our oven doesn't work. Right? And so if you're in a season of plenty, don't worry, it'll change. Right? If you're young and you're fit, it's going to change. right? I want to get to this. Yeah, time marches on, right? If you're at a place where you're thinking life is unfair, it'll change, right? This is something that I especially notice every summer, right? The summer is so busy for me, and I notice it specifically when I do church camp and work camp. You might notice it if like when you go on vacation, right? Those places where we disappear for a week and we disconnect from the regular world, and then when we come back and we plug in, people are like, "Did you hear about this? Did you hear about this? Did you hear about?" It's like, what happened? Like there have been times where like I come back and just like the world is falling apart while I was unplugged, right? And just like time just continues to march. Right? This is why when we lose loved ones, the mourning hurts so much, right? Because when we're mourning, we pause to sit and mourn the loss, but the rest of the world does not. And so not only are we sitting to mourn, but we're watching everything else just walk away from us, right? Knowing that when we finally set the mourning aside and step back into the real world, it's going to be different than it was than we left it. And so that just it's an exponential piling on of the mourning process. So Jews have this practice. They have this custom, they call it Shiva. And what it is they do it for 7 days. They do it for a full week. But after someone loses a loved one, they assign someone to just go in and sit with the person. That's all they do. They don't talk. They don't give advice. They don't do anything. They just sit. Says, you know what? While the rest of the world is marching on, I'm not. I'm going to sit here and I'm going to stay in this place with you. And then when evening comes, that person goes home, and the following day a new person shows up just to sit. Right? Because they understand, right, just how they let the person know that they're not alone, but then right, the loneliness that is exasperated in mourning because of that steady march of time, and it just keeps moving. This is also why when we counsel those who are in mourning, we give courage to begin to go and discover and find out what the new normal looks like. Now, I do want you to understand what I just said. What I did not say was get back to normal, right? Because there's no such thing. Right? If anyone ever offers you, hey, you need to get back to normal, they're a fool. They have no idea what they're talking about. Because you can't do it. It's impossible. Right? But we recognize, right, that we do have to reconnect with life and find out what this new normal is going to look. I shared where I think Ecclesiastes, right, is a book, whereas we come to it with the idea of trying to create gratitude. Ecclesiastes is a book where we can say life is painful and I have good things to hang, and we can hang on to both at the same time, right? And that's what the new normal is, right? Is it's hurt, the person is gone, and I try to figure out what life looks like. Because like when it comes to moments, you guys have heard me say it, and maybe I don't say it enough, maybe I say it too much, right? But when you love someone that much, you never stop missing them. And you miss them all over again when you come to Thanksgiving dinner and their seat is empty. And you come to Christmas dinner and their seat is empty. Or maybe it's you miss them every single night when you come to dinner and their seat is empty. Right? And the new normal is learning how to hang on to that, but also still join in this part of life that's continuing to move forward. Right? And the appropriate time and the appropriate way to do that is unique in every single situation. Right? And so it's something that we need to be sensitive to. Right? But that's why when we mourn, it isn't just the loss of the individual that we feel, it's the rest of life just continuing to march and march and march. We feel that at the same time. That's why it feels the way that it does. After this poem about time marching on, and I'm going to come back to time and looking at the time that I have, we're actually going to get out of here a little early this morning. After this poem, he mentions about some of the blessing that is life, but ultimately he gets to justice. The teacher in Ecclesiastes gets to justice. And he mentions about how God is just, but he testifies to how the systems that we're working in our world do not provide the justice that God has in mind. And he makes the point that ultimately God will judge. God will bring justice. I mentioned all those songs at the beginning. That's where David Allan Coe was in my head, because the only time I know I'll hear David Allan Coe is when Jesus has his final judgment day. And so that's why that one was in my head this week. This topic of justice, I'm not going to leave it alone. We're going to come back to it in 2 weeks. And so we're going to look at this one 2 weeks and connect these things to Jesus. But this dread, right, that we can create when we think about time and how just time marches on and it just keeps moving and moving and moving and moving and moving, it is also a holy and blessed design that God built into the universe. It is not just something that builds dread. This march of time is also what brings us to Sabbath, week after week after week after week. Our call to worship this morning came from the fourth day of creation, right, where God put the sun and the moon and the stars in the sky, right, so that we could keep track of time. And one of the reasons for the keeping track of the time was it said for the seasons, or depending on the translation, the appointed festivals, so that they knew when to take a break and celebrate Passover, so that they knew when to take a break and celebrate the Day of Atonement or the Feast of Booths, or ultimately Hanukkah, right? Or we do Thanksgiving and Easter and Christmas. And he says, like, that was the purpose of it, right? The sun and the moon and the stars were so that we could measure the seasons so that we knew when to pause and take a break. The creation event is capped off with the seventh day of creation, in which there is rest. And it says that it's a day that God has made holy. It's in the Ten Commandments, right? Which, by the way, if you follow the pattern of the creation event there in chapter 1, right? On day 1, there was evening and morning. On day 2, there was evening and morning. Day 5, day 6, day 7. Day 7, there's no evening and morning. It's just day 7, and then it is. And even Jesus himself, when he got in trouble, right, for not obeying the Sabbath, for picking weed on the Sabbath, for healing on the Sabbath, and he got in trouble for it, the thing he said was, see, the thing about the Sabbath is we were not created for the Sabbath. God did not create us so that we could religiously and ritually maintain the order of the Sabbath. The Sabbath was created for us because he knew that we would need the rest. So we weren't created for the Sabbath was created for us. Right? This march of time that we view, right, and in some places we love it because, right, it's providing good things, and in some places we hate it because it's providing bad things. It is God ordained. It is a holy march that leads us to rest over and over and over and over again. And the reason that we don't find it restful is because we don't use it the way that we were supposed to. This is why, right? We struggle because we fill it and we fill it and we fill it and we fill it. And it's a day to pause. And not the way I've heard it a lot lately is we were created to be human beings, not human doings. And that's what we do is we do and we do and we do and we work and we work and we work. One of the themes I keep repeating throughout this is that, right, gratitude is a choice. It's a matter of perspective. And the author of Ecclesiastes is correct. Time marches on. Right? And whatever it is that we have going on in our lives, our lives are not going to stay that way. Time is going to march on. If it's health, time will bring unhealth. If it's unhealth, time may bring health and healing. Right? And ultimately, especially one that's felt in this room, is the age that comes as time continues to march on. And we can dread it, and we can fight it, and we can hate it, and we can do everything that we do to push against it, or we can embrace it. And we can plan. And when we come to the day of Sabbath, whether it's today for you guys, for mine, it's generally Friday. That's why I love this time of year, because to go and sit in a tree stand and do nothing. To sit in that tree stand and to look at the clock and go, I'll spend another hour sitting here doing nothing. Right? And to sit and just think and talk to God. But it is a choice, and it's about perspective. Whether it's to fight and hate the march of time that is very much real and very much true, but to also embrace that over and over and over again, God calls us to himself. And he calls us to rest, and he calls us to relax over and over and over again. Let us pray. Lord, I thank you for your scriptures and the way that it is that you provide for us. We're sitting here in this book, Ecclesiastes, and it is a thing that right, there's this harsh reality to what it is that's going on in Ecclesiastes. Like, in a way, there is nothing that the teacher is saying that is a lie. Right? There's now what he's saying can be coming from a very narrow point of view, and it could be missing the fuller version of the story and the truth. But when we look this morning at the nature of time and how it is always moving and always clicking away, right? It's true, right? And for some of us, it causes anxiety, right? This, oh no, if I just stop for a minute, I'm going to fall behind. Man, if I just pause for just a minute, I'm going to lose, right? Like this life is a race or something. What are we racing to? What is it that we're trying to achieve? Right? That's the answer to the question we need to know. This march of time, that's something that it adds pain to pain. Right? To lose. Right? To lose a loved one. And to have to pause and say goodbye. And at the same time feeling this march of time as we pause, we can feel ourselves being left behind by the rest of the world as we stop to pause and say goodbye. And so it adds to pain. This march of time also leads us to you. You designed it from the beginning 7 days. 6 days we shall do our labor, on the seventh we shall rest. It is a holy day. It is a holy thing. It is a blessed thing to pause and spend time with you. And you built into this schedule, into this march of time, a very intentional opportunity to just stop and be with you and to do it together. This isn't something we're supposed to do by ourselves. You call us to do it together with each other. It's what we're doing right now. And it is in that rest that we find peace and healing and purpose and courage and encouragement. Lord, I pray that we would see this as the opportunity that it is to pause, to see the blessedness of this routine, of this march that brings us back to you over and over, Lord, and we would embrace it and let it build in us the things that you promise it will build in us when we're obedient to you. And I pray this, Jesus, in your name.